Presentation on Porfiriato, the era of Porfirio Diaz's presidency. So who was Porfirio Diaz? He was born mestizo in Oaxaca, Mexico, meaning he was mixed race, and he was born into poverty. He joined the militia in Oaxaca to fight the Mexican-American War in 1864. So in that time, he took after Benito Juarez, who was the governor of Oaxaca at the time. Juarez was a liberal lawyer. He was against Santa Anna, who was a conservative president of Mexico. So eventually Juarez became president of Mexico, and he promoted Diaz as a military general after the Reform War in 1860 between the liberals and the conservatives. Diaz, something he's known for was he was a cavalry commander in the Battle of Puebla, which was Cinco de Mayo, 1851, which secured the victory for Mexico against the French invasion. So he eventually instigated a rebellion against Juarez, using the slogan, "No re-election." So he compared Juarez to the authoritarian rule that Santa Anna had. This rebellion failed. He eventually went off to America to kind of regroup. He gained some support from foreign investment there. And eventually, once Juarez died, Lerdo became president, who was the vice president of Juarez. And this is when Diaz decided to try again. So he came back with more support this time, and he was able to take over the Mexican government through a coup and became president. Ironically, he ran on the idea of a democracy. However, he ended up becoming the longest reigning president of Mexico for 35 years. One thing that he did was he settled Mexican debts with the U.S., which is how he gained recognition as the president of Mexico. So he allowed U.S. investors into Mexico, which caused a lot of economic problems for the people of Mexico over time. So the infrastructure, railroads, bridges, mines, they were built largely through this era of his presidency from 1876 to 1911, and with foreign investment. Diaz eventually agreed to step down. However, once the election came around in 1910, he was not in support of Madero, who was the person running against him for president, and he eventually ended up committing election fraud, which outraged the citizens of Mexico. They didn't believe that he had won by a large margin, as he claimed, and with the support of the people, Madero ended up calling for revolt, which is what started the Mexican Revolution. So this is a quote from Diaz during this time when he was being kicked out of the presidency. So he said, "Madero has released a tiger. Let us see if he can control it." So before Diaz became president, there was a lot of instability in Mexico, and he was kind of implying that there would likely continue to be instability after him. And he was right. During the whole decade after his presidency, there was a lot of exchange of power, murdering of presidents, and it was difficult to maintain the stability that Diaz had maintained for so long. So right here, this is a program from like a celebration for the centennial of the beginning of Mexican independence. So 100 years after, so this was in 1910. In the photos here, we have Hidalgo on the left, and he is known for the Grito de Dolores, which is considered the beginning of Mexico's independence from Spain. So that's what the celebration was for. On the right, on the top, there is Juarez, and it says lex below him, meaning law. And so Diaz, even though he had problems with him towards the end of his presidency, he did take after him in the beginning. And so he does recognize him as having established law. He came in with his liberal beliefs, and he did change policy in Mexico. So let's see. So on the bottom is Diaz, and below him says peace or pax, basically implying that he brought order, stability, kind of calm, absence of fighting through his presidency, even though he did rule with kind of an authoritarian approach. He did bring lots of stability to Mexico. So key things that he did during this time. So he didn't fully support, however, he didn't renounce the control of the Catholic Church like Juarez did. So Juarez had some anti-clerical laws. He tried to kind of cut back on the strength of the conservatives. However, during Diaz's presidency, he was Catholic, and so he kind of turned a blind eye to the control that the Catholic Church had over, or was regaining over, schools, collecting tithes, establishing religious orders, things of that nature. Diaz mandated land surveys, which often ended in local communities losing their land, and they couldn't provide a title for the property, or it was deemed vacant because they bribed judges to claim that they were vacant when they were not. So that land could be sold to foreign investors, so they could grow crops and profit. They would often sell the land that was closest to the infrastructure that the investors built, so like the railways. And so the people who had previously been farming on that land ended up having to be laborers because they no longer had land. And so it ended up being the foreign investors who would profit. So Diaz ruled with a policy of pan o palo, meaning bread or stick. So he would reward his followers, his supporters, with land, with bribes, and then anyone who went against him would be killed, enslaved, they could be jailed. So he kept a strict order that way and was able to maintain his presidency for so long in that way. So why is this important? So he had lasting influence in a lot of ways. So before, as I mentioned, before his presidency, there was a lot of instability in Mexico, which prevented investors from coming in because they were bringing their money, they want to know that they'll profit, and when there's this much instability, they're unsure. So he was able to maintain order in Mexico, which brought in all of these funds to build the infrastructure that they still benefit from having today. And so another thing that he did was the build industry. So even though the Mexican people didn't necessarily benefit from the industry as much as the foreign investors, he still built textile mills, oil rigs, mining. He built all the industry that still exists there today. Production increased as well across the country due to improved transportation, growing of major cities, ability to move things like silver that's being mined through these new railways and roads. He did leave the country free of debt, and one of the biggest things is that he's seen as having laid the basis for post-revolutionary Mexico. So even though there was a lot of turmoil during the revolution, had he not done what he did during this time, even though it benefited foreign investors the most, Mexico wouldn't have all this infrastructure, all this industry to build off of today. Thank you so much.